Hello, America. I'm Mark Levin. This is Life, Liberty, and Levin. This is a huge subject we're going to discuss tonight for the full hour. A huge subject. The Democrat Party is not really a national party. What the Democrat Party does is it breaks down the country by race, by religion, by sex, by what kind of sex you like, by geography. And it's the old FDR method of trying to cobble together various communities and various groups based on physical distinctions and economic distinctions, and to build a majority that way. And you can see the Democrats have never stopped, and Joe Biden is doing this in a big way. They're targeting the suburbs of America. They're targeting the suburbs of America. They talk about the white women in the suburbs with college degrees, and they feel like they're going to win that vote, and if they win that vote, they're going to win the presidency. How do I know that? Because I read it in the newspapers, and everything in the newspapers must be true. But it is true. And so they feel that this is the weak underbelly of the Trump campaign. And so I want to focus on this for a moment, and I want to start this way. The suburbs today are not the suburbs of half a century ago. The suburbs today, whether you read an analysis by CBS News in 2016 that looked at 2010 and said the suburbs are 35% minority, or whether you look at the Atlantic, which says that 52% of the black community actually lives in the suburbs and not the inner city. The suburbs are far more diverse than the cities. They're very diverse, but they're being targeted. Being targeted for what? Federalized, centralized government control by the left. And it really started under Obama. And that's why this is a very, very important topic for people who live in the suburbs, people who want to live in the suburbs, and people who don't live in the suburbs but care about the nature of their country. And so I'm bringing the best expert I know to talk about this, Stanley Kurtz, Senior Fellow at the Ethics and Public Policy Center, contributing editor, National Review. He's had wonderful articles there about this, author of Spreading the Wealth. Stanley, how are you, sir?
I'm great, Mark. Thanks so much for having me.
Well, it's a pleasure. So let's start at the beginning. What is it that the federal government did to ensure that the civil rights and equality would exist in housing all across the country?
Well, Mark, the federal government during the civil rights era passed the Fair Housing Act of 1968. And rightly, the Fair Housing Act prevents discrimination in housing. So if people come to buy a home or to rent an apartment, they should be treated in the same way regardless of race, regardless of ethnicity, if they're immigrants, regardless of national origin. That is the law, and it should be the law, and HUD, under both Democrat and Republican administrations, enforces that law.
So this seems morally correct under every circumstance. It seems like something that's been in place a very long time. It seems to be working pretty well. But then Obama becomes president of the United States. And what does Obama do with that 1968 statute?
Well, Obama represents a segment of the Democratic Party, an increasingly influential segment, that really doesn't think well of the suburbs. Of course, as you mentioned, they want suburban votes. What they're a little less eager to have understood is that they consider suburbs themselves in some ways fundamentally unjust. Why? Because when people move out to the suburbs, they take their tax money with them. And that is viewed by Obama and many other Democrats as a way of selfishly keeping your money from less well-off people in the cities. So the Obama administration, riding on some language in the original Fair Housing Act that did not have all the meanings he gave to it, created a really massive rule called affirmatively furthering fair housing. Now, there was a brief mention of affirmatively furthering fair housing in the original Fair Housing Act, but all it really meant at the time was that the Secretary of Housing and Urban Development should take positive steps to make sure that people didn't discriminate in housing between people of different races or ethnicities, etc., just as we said before. But Obama took that brief mention and created out of it a transformative rule, a little bit like Obamacare, in that it's a massive rule that does a great many things, and you have to keep delving and delving. And the bottom line is that AFFH, the acronym for Affirmatively Furthering Fair Housing, would radically undercut the political and economic independence of America's suburbs. It would allow bureaucrats in Washington, in the Department of Housing and Urban Development, to control zoning laws, to control the placement of transportation and business districts, even to some degree the drawing of school districts. In other words, almost every important local governmental responsibility could, under AFFH, fall into the de facto control of the feds.
So effectively, in so many crucial respects to the people who live in these communities, or the people who want to live in these communities, the federal government would nationalize, federalize decisions respecting the economy, schooling, law enforcement, housing, zoning, commercial activity, transportation hubs. Have I missed something?
You probably have, Mark. I've probably missed something, because there are so many things in the AFFH regulation, it's hard to keep track. For example, I'll give you just one example of something we both missed, quote unquote. The AFFH will allow the feds to push local governments into regional governing consortia. Now, what does that bit of gobbledygook actually mean? It means that it will try to create a layer of government in between the federal government and local government, a layer of government that corresponds to your greater metropolitan area. So if you are in, say, Montgomery County outside of Philadelphia, it will try to remove your governing responsibilities and hand them over to the greater Philadelphia metropolitan area, which will probably end up taking a chunk of your tax money. So there's a lot in AFFH.
I suspect they're going to need to keep a lot of data on what's going on with schools, where houses are built, what kind of houses are built, who lives in these houses, what kind of density you have in a particular area, and on and on and on and on. And these federal bureaucrats are going to be doing it out of the HUD building, as opposed to people in communities, going to their zoning boards, going to their commissioners, going to their city councils. Is that correct?
That's absolutely correct, Mark. And here's how it really will work. The feds will provide some basic census data to the localities that apply for various grants from the federal government. But really, then they will force your locality, your county, or your municipality to fill out a very detailed demographic form. And you're going to have to list where everyone in your jurisdiction lives according to their economic status, according to race, according to ethnicity, if they're immigrants, according to national origin, according to English language proficiency, according to handicap status. And there are, I could go on, and I will go on and explain how that will then be used by the feds. But one crucial thing you need to know is, when you fill out that form, if you check the wrong boxes, you could be opening yourself up to a lawsuit as a locality, and that would have tremendous negative effects. And we've already seen a kind of run-through of this in Westchester County in New York State, which the Obama administration used as a kind of dry run for its AFFH rule. So if you are sued, that would give the feds an additional lever, say, to force you to go into a regional governmental consortium, to force you to remove your zoning and make it the way the feds want, to force you to spend tens and even hundreds of millions of dollars on high-density, low-income housing. There's almost nothing they can't do once they scare you into a lawsuit. And if you fill out that form the wrong way, you are really opening yourself up to a suit.
And I want to talk about Westchester County, New York in the next segment, so the audience understands this is real world. This is not theoretical. This is not abstract. This is not of the possible. This is of reality. And I want to talk about what Joe Biden intends to do about it. Now, President Trump comes into office, Ben Carson becomes Secretary of HUD, and you have this Obama regulation out there. What have they done with this regulation?
Well, the good news, there's a lot of good news, actually. From the beginning, Secretary Carson and President Trump suspended the enforcement of AFFH, but they didn't actually end the rule. They didn't pull it away, and there was a lot of hemming and hawing about what should actually be done. But very recently, President Trump, with the help of Secretary of Carson, have in a very powerful and effective way put an end to AFFH as it was created under the Obama-Biden administration. And this is really a tremendous accomplishment because we often have what we call in government the ratchet effect. A ratchet only goes one way. It either stops or it moves in one direction. And people say that the federal government often is under a ratchet effect, meaning it only gets bigger, or maybe if a Republican gets in, it stays about the same, but it never actually shrinks. And this is a case where President Trump, with the help of Secretary Carson, have actually countered the ratchet effect. Not only have they peeled back virtually the entirety of the Obama-Biden AFFH rule, this radical, overreaching rule, but they've even peeled back some layers that had accumulated over the original law, which weren't really about what was in the law, even before the Obama-Biden AFFH. So this is a brilliant stroke on the part of the Trump administration. It's a courageous action, and it sets up a radical dichotomy between what Biden is going to offer the suburbs, which is AFFH turbocharged, so to speak, and we can explain the turbocharging later, on the one hand, and President Trump, on the other hand, is saying to the suburbs, oh no, I'm not going to mess with your fundamental freedoms. Joe Biden is, and there's going to be a choice like night and day.
Well, when we come back, that's exactly what I want to focus in on. I think people need to understand that this election really is so crucial. It's not about theory. It's not about policy that affects somebody else. The left is very, very serious about fundamentally changing America, and that means school systems, police departments, zoning, and the only way they can do it is to nationalize these local decisions. Now, of course, when it comes to rioting in the streets and the mayors supporting it or closing their eyes to it, all of a sudden they're federalists. But when it comes to everything else, let's not fool ourselves. They're iron-fisted central government promoters, and this is very important. They're targeting the suburbs for votes, and now the suburbs need to understand that they're also intending to target them for control. We'll be right back.